Had a number of questions come in, so thank you very much to all participants for those. I guess I should start off because the first two were actually for me. So thank you very much for those questions. James Clark asked me, he himself says it's not easy to answer. Previously, we've tried to present the uptake of VI key metrics, such as sprayers tested, IPM plans, etc. as percentage of business or land area or production. How far has uptake increased against these metrics? What areas should receive more focus? Well, it's really hard to actually answer, as you say. But if I just take the IPM plan for as an example, when we first introduced it, we had very good uptake of it, and we also measured the amount of acres that the IPM plan covered. However, in subsequent years, what we found was that people were completing the plan, printing it off, putting it in a drawer, and then just revisiting that paper copy. So what we've done with our new IPM plan is we've changed it so that it actually has to be done in real time. And the idea is that in the long term, we'll actually encourage people to come back and reassess how their IPM plan is working during the actual growing season. So we're making it a lot more dynamic, I guess. And it's probably worth mentioning that the whole area of metrics is a big area of work for us in the coming years. We're speaking with our partners such as NFU, but also with the likes of DEFRA, Caroline Nichols and her team, and I think Caroline's on the call today. And we actually have a meeting with DEFRA, and that will be one of the metrics is on the agenda for that tomorrow. So that's probably all I can say on that. The second one was from Roma Gwyn. Roma, I think I perhaps didn't explain it particularly well, but I was actually agreeing with what you've put in your question here, is that I think, the economics needs to be driving IPM. And as we heard from James in his talk, he suggested that adoption of these technologies really does need some sort of economic benefit as an impetus for take-up. And James, I don't know if you'd like to expand on that.
On the economics?
Sure.
Yeah, as far as I can tell, the data shows that the long run adoption of technology depends on economic benefits, profits, risk management, resource use. One of the questions that came in, and if you allow me, I'll respond, is about long-term implications of the technology adoption. And yes, often technology adoption brings with it both new opportunities and new challenges. The adoption of hybrid maize, one of the biggest changes that came with that, which is the sort of classic adoption case, is the U.S. Corn Belt became much larger because breeders had more control over plant maturity and other things, and so it spread in particular north. It used to be that there wasn't much corn for grain going north of the Iowa border, and now they grow corn for grain up into Manitoba. In terms of environmental issues, also there's certainly cases of that. One of the ones that we're living with right now is the widespread use of herbicide tolerant genetics has been the growth of resistant weeds and pests as well. And so from what I've seen, both Roundup resistant weeds are rapidly spreading, and so farmers are having to find other strategies. Bt rootworm control in maize broke down almost from the first couple of years, and so both of those are in the case. There's another situation which is developing in GPS guidance, with the widespread use of GPS guidance and the fact that older guidance technologies or older marker technologies are no longer even provided as standard equipment. It means that farmers are very dependent on GPS. So what happens if GPS goes down? And there's been actually quite a bit of looking in the security sort of arena about what happens when GPS goes down, especially if it goes down for an extended period. Can we still farm, and what kinds of problems occur? So yes, there are long-term implications, and it depends on what the technology is and how it's being used, or in the case as the case may be, misused.
Okay, thank you. That's really useful. There's a question to the panel in general from Martin Cox. Trying to implement IPM, for example, for potatoes, is mainly frustrated by lack of reliable information, pest, disease, virus, for example. Information usually incomplete for newer varieties, which is ironic, as those are the one we have no experience of. We have also little information on pests and disease across cropping patterns, so the introduction of cover crops makes it complicated for diseases like Rhizoctonia, Verticillium, Fusarium, and free-living nematodes in particular. So how do we get the industry to understand the concept of integrated crop management, which requires basic information before we launch into models like PCN models that need more basic information to function well? And, this sort of comes down to sort of analysing the ecosystem, which, Charles, you mentioned at the top of your presentation. So, Charles, would you like to try and answer that?
Sorry, Neil, I was actually making some notes on a different question as you were going through that. I will come back to you if you don't mind.
Okay, no, that's fine. Keith, would you have any thoughts on that? Integrated.
Yeah, it is an interesting thing, which in relation to the slugs and of course other work we've been involved with is becoming more and more important. In slugs, for example, the previous crop will affect the risk of population development in a subsequent crop, either improving it or reducing the likelihood of slug infestations. What we don't know there is whether the natural enemies cycle in the same way. And I think in many of these cases, we need, as the questionnaire suggests, much more information at crop level of almost the ecosystem interactions before we can really make much use of a lot of the naturally occurring suppressants of pest populations. And so I would very much agree that one of the focuses which we need to look at in the future is integrated crop management as much as integrated pest management. There are advantages, I think, in oilseed rape. There are numerous or several pests which will attack in the spring, another pest which will attack in the autumn. And one of the things I've been frequently asked and increasingly asked over the last few years is that instead of dealing with these pests one at a time, is there any way in which we can look at the autumn pest problem and how to best integrate our activities to suppress that level, all the pests in that area, and similarly for the spring summer pest problems? For me, there is a lot of advantage in sustainability in doing it this way, and I would agree, increased focus on integrated crop management or integrated pest management for the whole suite of pests on a crop is well worth further investigation.
Okay, thank you very much, Keith. That's really interesting. A note from Hazel Doonan here. Just to say that training for members of NAROSO, I think it was called On Target course, in 2007 included deposition patterns and use of water-sensitive paper in training to demonstrate patterns for different nozzles. She says, time to revisit this next year. And I would agree. In fact, I think with the online NAROSO course that's just been launched, there is actually a section that looks at precision spraying in terms of nozzle design. But I guess this moves us on to a question for Charles. Charles, which was the question that you were looking to answer with your no?
So, well, there was a few. There was one, someone who was asked about, it was a very short question, It was, I think, a quote from one of my slides, which said only spreads rather than increasing the amount of active ingredients. I think that's referring to, I made a bullet point in there about wetting agents or spreaders being used to increase the spray coverage of your spray deposition. And I think the person, Alan Horgan, is asking perhaps for what I mean about that. I think really that statement I made is perhaps more applicable in horticultural crops, which are the nature of the spraying. They're quite often sprayed from the side. Some crops are obviously sprayed from above, but because of that, I think in horticulture there's a greater risk that spray machines can be set up incorrectly and can actually, a reasonable percentage of the spray plume can actually go right over the top of the crop. So that's a worst case scenario, but there's also situations that I kind of mentioned in my presentation where the spray plume distribution is not correctly set so that it's not targeting the actual area of the canopy where it should be. So what I mean by the wetting agents only increasing the spread, the coverage, I think that's true. They're only really dispersing the droplets in a fairly localized area along the leaf, but they're not able to increase the absolute quantity of active ingredients in a particular part of the canopy. That has to come down to the spray machine being set up correctly. Make sure those spray plumes are actually going into the right place in the canopy. I hope that clarifies what I meant.
Yeah, no, that's great. And actually, there's another quick question for you, because this will get us back in time. It's from Colin Carter, I think, to you, Charles, again. Do you think reduced precision spray technology has implications for resistance management issues on remaining?
Yeah, I think it definitely does, and this is something I think I mentioned it in my presentation as well. I think it is a risk. I think probably the solution really comes down to just making sure that the detection systems for the pests and diseases are really good. What we don't want to happen is that reducing the dosage applied into the crop risks under spraying and therefore increasing pesticide resistance. But that all comes down to the calculations being applied for the dosage adjustment. If we're completely confident that there's no pest risk in certain areas of the crop, then I don't think not spraying there is going to risk pesticide resistance. But if we've got any information to suggest that there is a pest there, obviously it needs to be sprayed correctly.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. So apologies for the late start and my technical failure, but that nicely brings us back onto track in terms of time. So
sorry, Neil, I don't know if I could just very quickly mention, so John Knight has asked a question about electrostatic spraying. I just very quickly say, John, I haven't specifically, I know about electrostatic spraying and I've been looking at it from a kind of on paper for a while. There's very little evidence that I've seen of it being commercially successful so far. I would love to see in real life an electrostatic sprayer on a farm. I've only ever seen them kind of as demonstration machines. The idea is wonderful. It's been around a long time. But yeah, if someone can show me that it really does work, I would love to try it out.
Great. Well, maybe that's something for next year.